Hey everyone, it's Short Fiction Friday. This week I read 4 different short stories. Freaktent by Nancy A. Collins, Residue by Alice Henderson, Black Box by Gemma Files, and Polyp by Barbie Wilde. Let's start with Freaktent by Nancy A. Collins. This was the best of the short stories that I read this week. It first appeared in The Horror Show magazine, the spring 1990 issue, edited by David B. Silva. Our main character here is Kevin. He's a photographer. Currently he's photographing sideshow performers and carnies. During Kevin's conversations with the carnies, they're talking about how sometimes there's these middlemen, people who find sideshow performers and bring them to the attention of the traveling circus or carnivals. And for this middleman kind of service, they get a small fee, right? Like a finder's fee or, a commission. And they're talking about how one of these middlemen, Cabrini, they're very suspicious of. Like he just finds too many people with these bodily deformities. So then Kevin takes it upon himself to investigate Cabrini. How is it that Cabrini finds so many freaks for the freak tent? This was a very good story. Some very memorable characters, even in such a short time frame. The one thing is that I felt that the ending was a little bit rushed. Honestly, I would have been happy with a story twice as long. This was good. All right, the next short story I read was Residue by Alice Henderson. The next 3 stories that I read were first published in the body horror book. In Residue, our main character Galen, he's some sort of archaeologist or anthropologist. He's investigating some ancient pottery, Anasazi pottery that he's found. He's trying to determine, is it legitimate or is it some sort of fake? And while he's investigating it, he accidentally cuts himself on the pottery, and an ancient, long dormant parasite gets into his bloodstream. And from there, the story is very much like a animal attack horror story, featuring this weird worm parasite thing. Yeah, this was entertaining, and it's exactly the kind of story that I like to read. Very straightforward. Reminded me of Slugs by Sean Hudson, of course. Okay, and less positively, the next thing I read was Black Box by Gemma Files. Our 2 main characters here are Miss Devise, who is a powerful psychic who's been institutionalized. And there's also Sylvester, who's one of the researchers. And the entire short story is like a long conversation between these 2. There are way too many ideas crammed into this short story. You've got backstory about the institution itself. You've got backstory about Miss Devise. You've got all sorts of explanations about the extent of her psychic powers and a traumatic situation she'd been through earlier. There's something about the black box of the title is some sort of almost like a sensory deprivation chamber that I guess the psychic feels comfortable in. And there's also stuff about archival information, I guess evidence and photographs. All of these ideas are touched upon, but none of them are investigated for any period of time. You never get a clear sense of what any of this is. All this information thrown at you, it doesn't feel fast-paced, like pulpy fun. It just feels like you're being bombarded with a bunch of nonsense. The writer has a real vague style that completely works against the story. There's nothing concrete to grasp onto. If anything, it just feels like an excerpt of a much larger story. like a chapter has just been ripped out of a book or something. But that's not the case. I looked into it. And then through all this, there's basically no horror to the story either. Her psychic powers are treated kind of just like a medical problem to be investigated. So yes, while awful things might be happening to her body, to me that's not really a horror story. That's just a description of a medical problem. Right? And I could write a story about an Alzheimer's patient or something. And would that be horror? Personally, I don't really think so. So there's got to be a little bit more to it for me to feel like this is a horror story. But I understand that's more of a subjective thing. So no, I did not like this one, and I found all the events and the conversation in it to be very forgettable. All right, last story, Polyp by Barbie Wilde. Now, I didn't really like this story either, but at least it was concrete, it was straightforward, and I could at least grasp what the author was trying to do, even if it wasn't successful. So in Polyp, we have our main character, Vincent. He's getting a colonoscopy, and during his colonoscopy, they find this mutated polyp thing. This story was totally fine at the start. I enjoyed reading about Vincent's nervousness and kind of the process of getting a colonoscopy. But then about halfway through, or maybe a little bit more than halfway, the story gets very goofy. You know, once you find out what this polyp thing is, it's just played for laughs. It's very silly, schlocky. And I felt that none of the humor landed or was particularly funny. So yeah, a bit of a shame. So I enjoyed the story more when it was played a little bit more seriously at the start. So I probably would have preferred it if the writer had taken the whole thing a little bit more seriously. Yeah, overall I did not enjoy this one. Alright, and ranking the stories, potentially putting them into my top 20. I'll put my top 20 list up on the screen here. Freaktent by Nancy A. Collins. I really like this story, but it's not going to quite get into the top 20. This was definitely the best story that I read this week, and Nancy A. Collins has impressed me so far. I've really liked both the short stories that I've read by her. Alright, let's pick some new short stories for next week. And actually, I'm going to change the way that I do this. There's only 3 or 4 stories left in each book, so the 12-sided die is increasingly redundant. There's nowhere near 12 stories left, so I'll get rid of this. And what I'll do is I'll just roll the 6-sided die twice. The first roll will select the book. The second roll will select the story within the book. So body horror, I'll make this 1 through to 3. Dark love will be 4 through to 6. Okay, first roll. Three, that's the body horror book. And what story will I get? 4. So I'm skipping over all the stories with pencil marks next to them. I've already read those in previous episodes. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll read The Other Side by Ramsey Campbell, which is 13 pages long. I will keep rolling the die until I get to a minimum of 50 pages total. Okay, second roll. 3. And selecting the story. 1. Okay, the first story here is Transformation by Mary Shelley. That's 19 pages long, which takes me to a total of 32 pages so far. Okay, third roll. 2. That's the body horror book. I'll roll for the story. 2. 1, 2. I'll be reading 'Tis the Season to be Jelly by Richard Matheson. That's 5 pages long, which takes us to a total so far of 37 pages. Okay, fourth roll. 6. That's Dark Love. Let's see what story I get. 5. Okay, there's not actually 5 stories left in this book, so I'll just pick the final one there. I'll be reading The Maiden by Richard Lehman, which is 26 pages long. That takes me well over the 50-page minimum. Alright, that's all the short stories for next week. I'll put the selected short stories up on the screen here. I got a lot of big names this week, that's good. I'm looking forward to all these stories, but especially Richard Matheson, I think. Also, by process of elimination, I know what I'm reading for the week after as well. So I might as well put these up on the screen too. I'll be reading Basil Copper, Stephen King, and Michael O'Donoghue. Go read these short stories if you have access to them, and I'll see you all again next week. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye.